Good morning. We're going into the last part of our chapter, thermodynamics. Now, if you remember, last class, the last session, we discussed about molar specific heat capacity, which we defined as C equal to delta Q by N delta T. That is, for example, suppose the system or the substance that we have taken is a gas enclosed inside a cylinder fitted with a piston, and let's say we are supplying delta Q of heat. This delta Q of heat that is supplied for 1 mole of the gas to raise its temperature through 1 unit, delta T, is what you call as the molar specific heat capacity. So the condition is that you need to take 1 mole of the gas and also change the temperature through 1 unit. So for that, how much quantity of heat must you supply is what you call as molar specific heat capacity. Now, you may transfer the heat in two ways. One, you can keep the volume a constant. That means you do not allow the gas to expand, but the pressure is allowed to increase. Okay. So the internal energy and the pressure can change, but the volume is kept a constant, in which case we call this as molar specific heat at constant volume. That is, the quantity of heat that you must supply to 1 mole of the substance to change its temperature through 1 unit, keeping the volume a constant. On the other hand, you can also do it by keeping the pressure a constant. That means the gas is allowed to expand, but the pressure of the gas will be kept a constant while the heat transfer is taking place. So quantity of heat supplied to raise the temperature of 1 mole of a gas or substance through 1 unit, keeping the pressure a constant, is what you define as molar specific heat capacity at constant pressure. Both of them have the SI unit, joule per mole per Kelvin. Now, what we're going to do now is to find a relation between Cp and Cv, which is what you call as the Mayer's relation. So, we're going to derive relation between Cp and Cv. Okay, here, if we go back to our last session, first law of thermodynamics, which says the quantity of heat supplied delta Q is equal to part of it is utilized to change its internal energy. The remaining is utilized to do work. That means if the gas is allowed to expand and push the piston up, then work is done, which is given by F into displacement, force into displacement. Force is pressure into area. But if you look at A into delta X, that actually tells us the change in volume, because you have the piston with a base area A, displacement is delta X. So base area into displacement will give you the change in volume. So you may replace this delta W with P delta V. Now, since we know delta Q, Cp is, as you know, delta Q by N delta T, where if we are talking about 1 mole of the gas, then this N is 1. So delta Q by delta T at constant pressure can be, so I have divided here with delta T. So this is going to be delta U by delta T, again at constant pressure, plus this P delta V by delta T, this also at constant pressure, which is my first equation. Now, suppose we are doing this at constant volume, then we know Cv is also delta Q by N delta T, because it is 1 mole, N I have taken as 1 at constant volume. But when you do that here, this change in volume is 0, because delta V, we are doing it at constant volume. So delta V equal to 0. Therefore, delta Q by delta V, delta T will simply be equal to delta U by delta T, which is at constant volume, which is also equal to delta U by delta T at constant pressure, because this internal energy changes are only dependent on the temperature, not on the volume, on the pressure. So delta change in internal energy by delta T at constant volume and pressure will be the same. Also, we know the ideal gas equation, PV equal to nRT. Again, number of moles I am taking as 1. So PV equal to RT. So if you are going to keep this pressure a constant, then change in volume is dependent on the change in temperature. So we may write P delta V equal to R delta T, R again being a constant, universal gas constant. So we may write P delta V by delta T, I brought this to the left hand side, is R. So now what I'm going to do here is, in our equation here, this equation 1, I can replace this delta U by delta T, this one, delta U by delta T, which is delta U by delta T at constant volume, which is what we have as CV. So this I may replace with CV, molar specific heat at constant volume, and P delta V by delta T, we've got it as R, the universal gas constant. So P delta V by delta T in this equation, I will replace with R here. Okay, so that I may now write this as, this is, we have Cp here, bring Cv to the left hand side, Cv is equal to R, and this is what we have as the relation between Cp and Cv, Cp being the molar specific heat at constant pressure, Cv the molar specific heat at constant volume, and R the universal gas constant. So now that we finished this relation between Cp and Cv, we go on to discuss two processes, one called the isothermal process and the other the adiabatic process. See, if a process takes place at constant temperature, then it is called an isothermal process. That means if the gas is expanding, let's say it's taking in a quantity of heat and it's expanding, if the walls are diathermic, which we discussed in the first session as conducting walls, then the system is allowed to transfer heat. That means absorb heat from the surrounding, keeping the temperature of the gas a constant. Such a process is isothermal. If, let's say, whenever transfer of heat is allowed, the temperature of the gas can be kept a constant, and such processes where temperature is a constant is called as a isothermal process. Whereas in an adiabatic process, the system is kept insulated from its surroundings by adiabatic walls. No, the walls do not conduct heat. So no transfer of heat is allowed. In that case, there will be a change in temperature of the gas, and such a process is what you call as an adiabatic process. We need to derive expressions for work done in isothermal and as well as adiabatic process. So that's what we're going to do now. Work done in an isothermal process. So let's talk about a small work done dW, an infinitely small work done when the gas is expanding and changing its volume through a very small volume dV. So this is P into dV. Now for an isothermal process, if you take P, PV equal to nRT, you may say this is equal to a constant K, because number of moles constant, R is universal gas constant, T, because it is an isothermal process, I told you temperature is kept a constant. So this whole thing I have taken as a constant K. Or I may write P is equal to K by V from here. Okay, so I am going back to dW, the work done, as P I may write as K by V into dV. Now to find out the total work done, if the gas is expanding from, let's say, a volume V1 to a final volume V2, the total work done will be integrating dW, which is integrating K by V into dV from initial volume V1 to final volume V2. So the next step I can do here is W, the work done, is I'll take the constant outside, integral 1 by V dV from V1 to V2. 1 by V dV, I hope you know the integral is log V. So we have here, after integration, we have the total work done as K into, after integration I use the square bracket, log to the base E, after integration, B, V1 to V2, or W, the work done, is equal to, this K, as you know, is nRT, right? So I may write K bracket log to the base E, V2 minus log to the base E, V1, or this is K into log to the base E V2 by V1, or this is nRT, the constant temperature at which this is happening. K we know is nRT, where T is a constant. Log to the base E V2 by V1 is the total work done in an isothermal process when the gas is expanding from an initial volume V1 to a final volume V2 at a constant temperature T. So this derivation we need to find out work done in an isothermal process. Same thing we are going to do for work done in an adiabatic process. I told you in an adiabatic process there is heat transfer allowed, so there will be a change in temperature. Sorry, there is no heat transfer allowed, so there will be a change in temperature. Now for an adiabatic process, we have the equation PV raised to gamma is equal to a constant. This gamma is a ratio of specific heat, Cp by Cv. So for any adiabatic process, this equation is valid. PV raised to gamma equal to a constant, or P is equal to K by V raised to gamma. So now that small work done when the gas expands from V1 to V2 is P into dV, which is K by V raised to gamma into dV. Or I may write this as K into, when I bring this up, V raised to minus gamma into dV. So the total work done will be integral K into V raised to minus gamma dV, where I may take the K outside because it's a constant. So that's integral V1 to V2, V raised to minus gamma dV. As you know, x raised to n will be, integral is x raised to n plus 1 by n plus 1. So I may write this as K after integration V raised to minus gamma plus 1 by minus gamma plus 1 as it expands from V1 to V2. Here the upper limit minus the lower limit. So first V has to take the upper limit. So here we have work done equal to K bracket. This will be V2 raised to minus gamma into V2 raised to 1, that is minus gamma plus 1. And I take this minus gamma plus 1 outside and write it as 1 minus gamma here. Then this V will take the lower limit. So that is minus V1 raised to minus gamma, V1 raised to 1. Okay. Now here, so this is W equal to K, as you know, is PV raised to gamma, right? So K is also equal to P1 V1 raised to gamma equal to P2 V2 raised to gamma also. So here I am going to write 1 minus gamma, take the K inside. So when I take the K inside here, I am going to use this. So P2 V2 raised to gamma. Then we already have V2 raised to minus gamma into V2 minus. Again the K has to be given here, which I'll take this value. So that is P1 V1 raised to gamma, V1 raised to minus gamma into V1. So we get this cancelled out. So make W is equal to 1 minus gamma bracket P2 V2 minus, this also gets cancelled, P1 V1. As you know, PV equal to nRT, right? So using that, W, work done, is equal to 1 by 1 minus gamma. PV I may write as nRT, where N and R are constants. So for both terms, I will take the nR outside. This will be T2 minus, here it is PV equal to nRT1. nR I have taken outside. So this is T1. So this is the expression for work done in an adiabatic process where the gas is changing its volume from V1 to V2, temperature changing from T1 to T2. Gamma is the ratio of specific heats I told you, R is the gas constant, and N is the number of moles. Now that we have finished our work done in both isothermal and adiabatic process, we go on to discuss the second law of thermodynamics. We already did the zeroth law and the first law in the previous sessions. We are now discussing the second law of thermodynamics. The second law of thermodynamics has two statements. First one is the Kelvin-Planck statement. Okay, the first is the Kelvin-Planck statement. Now here, actually Kelvin-Planck statement is based on this heat engine which has been deleted from your portion. But anyway, it's good to have a rough idea about a heat engine before I talk about the Kelvin-Planck statement. A heat engine, as an example, is your automobile engine, which does work, mechanical work. It runs the car. The heat engine the good example is your automobile engine. So you will have a source which is at a higher temperature, let's say T1. We have a working substance. If it's a petrol engine, the working substance will be a mixture of petrol vapor and air. Then we have a sink which is at a lower temperature, T2, and the working substance absorbs heat from the source, Q1. Part of this work is, this heat is converted into work, which is useful work that we use to run our car. The rest of the heat is rejected into the environment, Q2. Now, the source and the sink are actually reservoirs. A reservoir is like the source is a reservoir from which the working substance can absorb any amount of heat without making any change to its temperature, T1. It remains at a constant temperature. Similarly, the sink, like the environment, the exhaust of your car actually rejects heat to the environment, not making any appreciable change to the temperature of the environment or the sink. Now, it's for an analogous example, what I can tell you is, if you consider a large ocean and you take a glass of water from the ocean, or if you add a glass of water to the ocean, it doesn't make any practically appreciable changes to the water level of the ocean. Similarly, from a source which is a reservoir at a temperature, very high temperature T1, the working substance can absorb any amount of heat and reject any amount of heat to a sink at a lower temperature without making any appreciable changes to the temperature of the source and the sink. Now, Kelvin-Planck statement states that, so heat engines, as you know, take up heat from the source, convert part of it to useful work and reject the remaining heat to the environment. But you know that heat engines or automobile engines are not 100% efficient. So Kelvin-Planck, that means you can't, you don't have a engine that converts all of the heat absorbed to useful work without rejecting anything to the environment. So Kelvin-Planck statement states that it is not possible to construct a device which absorbs heat from the source and converts that heat completely into work without rejecting anything into the environment. This is Kelvin-Planck's statement, which gives a limit to the efficiency of a heat engine. The second statement of the second law of thermodynamics is the Clausius statement. The second one is the Clausius statement. For this also we need to look at what we have as the refrigerator, which is a very common thing that you know. See, water actually flows from a higher level to a lower level, natural. But you can get water to flow from underground tank to an overhead tank by doing work on it, by using a pump. In a similar manner, heat always flows from higher temperature to lower temperature. That is the natural process. But you can get heat energy to flow from a colder environment to a hotter environment, but then you have to do work on it. And that is what is happening in a refrigerator. If you notice, the inside of the refrigerator is the colder environment. You absorb heat from the colder environment and reject it to the surrounding, which is at a higher temperature. But for that, the compressor has to do work. External work has to be done. That means if you have a source here, which is at the higher temperature, in our case, the environment around the refrigerator, we have the working substance, which we have the sink, which is a colder environment, that is the interior of the refrigerator. Now you have to do work on this working substance so that this working substance will absorb heat Q2 from a colder environment and reject it to the source. So you have to do work on the working substance. So Clausius statement states that it is not possible to construct a device working in a cycle where it absorbs heat from a colder environment and rejects it to a hotter environment unless and until you do work on it. This is second law of thermodynamics, second statement, Clausius statement. Okay. In the last part of this chapter, we go on to discuss reversible and irreversible processes. In our daily life, we come across many situations or many processes in which the newly created substance, you can revert it back to the initial state. For example, suppose you take ice and keep it in at room temperature. You know it will melt and water is formed. But you can keep this water back into the freezer and get it back into ice. So this is kind of a reversible process where you can get back the substance in its initial condition, but not perfectly reversible, of course. You also have situations like, let's say, cooking gas is leaking from the gas cylinder and diffusing into the room. Now, there is no possibility that you cannot reverse it. That means the cooking gas that has already diffused into the room cannot be brought back into the gas cylinder. So this is an irreversible process. So reversible and irreversible process. Irreversible process is the two reasons why most processes are irreversible. One is because lot of dissipative forces are involved, like frictional forces, viscosity are all dissipative forces. For example, suppose you take a liquid in a blender and you run the mixer. Finally the blender blades will come to a stop where all of the mechanical energy has been converted to internal energy of the liquid. And that's because of viscosity and also the friction between the different parts of the blender, the blades. So these are dissipative forces which you cannot reverse and get back the substance in the initial condition. So that is one reason why we have irreversible processes. Most of our processes are irreversible. Then there's also another reason is that for example, suppose an explosion of a chemical reaction takes place or the sudden expansion of a gas takes place, the processes are too fast in such a manner that the system is not in equilibrium with the surrounding, in which case it becomes an irreversible process. So for a process to be completely reversible, one, there should be no dissipative forces present. Second, the system should be in every stage in equilibrium with the surroundings, which is also a very not a possible situation to achieve, and that is why most processes are irreversible processes. For us, reversibility is a very important topic in thermodynamics because, as we discussed, heat engines are not 100% efficient, and it is found that if you really want to construct a heat engine that is highly efficient, the efficiency increases depending on if the process is completely reversible. So if the processes in a heat engine are completely reversible, then the efficiency is very much higher. Like, for example, in a Carnot engine, which is an idealized situation where reversible processes are taking place to bring the system back into its initial conditions, in which case the efficiency of a Carnot engine becomes 100% efficiency. So this is, and Carnot engine also has been deleted from your topics this year. So this is the end of our chapter, thermodynamics. So thank you.